Thank you so much for doing this interview with me today here at Left Bank Books.
It's a pleasure, Rena. Thanks. I'm really psyched to do it. I think of these as sort of late phase Zoom events. As we're going to transition back to being in person, it's really fun to do these kinds of things. So thank you. And I love Hanover and I love your shop. So happy to support.
Thanks. So the Math Campers. Amazing
Hey,
book.
hello. There it is.
So I first heard you read from the Math Campers at Poetry and Pie in Norwich, Vermont in the summer of 2019. And it's not an exaggeration to say that everyone in the barn fell in love with the work. Is there a particular aspect of the book that you like best or that you feel is most successful?
Thank you. That's really lovely. It was a great vibe, wasn't it? I mean, it was just a great day. It was a sunny, beautiful, pre-pandemic day in in just a pasture in Vermont in this beautiful barn. The folks at Literary North do a great job with that event, and I can't wait to attend it again. It was magical. And what do honestly, what I'm most proud of in the book is I hope it has, I hope it's gotten Vermont right. There's a lot of Vermont in the book, and that means a lot to me. Living away from home, I grew up in Burlington, and all my family is from there, and I spend as much time as I can there in the summers and other times too. But it's not like really living there and being a citizen of my home state. So I guess I had a little bit of an emigre's sense of, just love of depicting the place. And I hope I got it right. I hope I got what makes it special right. There's a lot in the book about the just the sort of deep communal bonds of living in such a place. And I guess actually the Poetry and Pie event would be an example of that kind of bond, but I hope that I got Vermont right. I hope I got sort of the larger New England right. There's a lot in this book that's set in Stonington, Connecticut, which is a beautiful coastal town where James Merrill, one of my great heroes, lived. So I hope that people will feel that it's done right by the landscape and by the people and by the spirit of the place.
So my favorite part is when the speaker is driving a car in a dream and strikes Troll, Robert Lowell, and then a stranger. Is this typical of the kind of anxiety dreams you experience?
Yes, sadly, yes. I read that poem a couple of years ago, and a very concerned elderly woman came up to me afterwards and said, I'm very worried about you and your dreams. Because what I'll say there are many dreams that are transcribed in the book, and I don't think you can fake it with a dream. I really don't. I think if you claim to have dreamed something you didn't dream, it's immediately clear. And so I'm proud to say that is a dream I actually had. Readers can see for themselves, but it has to do with driving through some winding, dark roads. I was picturing the Green Mountains, and I find that my worst nightmares have to do with I've done something terrible. And it's not usually somebody's doing something to me, chasing me, threatening me. It's that I've done something terrible. And I realized there's nothing I can do now about it. My life has changed. My life has changed. I'm now the person who did that. So in the dream, the first thing that happened was I ran into what I thought was a deer. And then I get out of my car and it's a troll from a storybook. I put the troll in the back of my car, in the trunk of my car. I drive on a little ways. I then hit another, I think, deer, but it turns out to be Robert Lowell. And I put his body in the back of my car, and then I hit a third deer. It turns out to be a stranger. So there's I don't know, sort of like a fairy tale or parable-like quality to the dream that really interested me. Yeah, and I transcribed it right away and pretty much wrote it down the way it happened. Clearly, there's a lot of, I don't know, anxiety of influence going on in this book, so that's why I had to kill Robert Lowell, who was actually the subject of my, one of the main subjects of my dissertation. So I actually had to kill him in the dream, clearly.
I like that. That's like some very useful insight into the poem too.
Well, thanks.
So when you wrote, it was painful to imagine that someone I had imagined me. I read that a few times, feeling a sort of joy that I was the fourth to participate in this imagining, that somehow I was the reader, I was included in this recursive scene. You go on to talk about fear, about being stranded, but I read it as a sort of inclusion. Later in the book, in Coda Stonington, you write, "In the books I read about the books I read." This feels like a return to that recursive gesture, but this time without fear and with the explicit inclusion of the reader. Can you talk a little bit about your use of recursive logics in the book?
That's a brilliant question and insight. Thank you. Let's see. So the book has, parts of it have a kind of structural conceit so let me back up just a little bit. I was imagining myself in the third person. I wanted to describe myself as a he in this new work that I was writing. I didn't want it to be so much first person driven. So I needed, practically speaking, I needed a narrator. I needed somebody to describe me and my thoughts and my impressions and my fears and my hopes and so on. So I came up with this structural conceit, which is that two strangers are in touch with one another, a man and a woman. The man is a poet, and he's been sending drafts of poems, ideas for poems, thoughts about poems to a stranger who's a woman. She narrates the experience of getting these things from him. Often she quotes from the poems that he's been sending. She will relay some secret that he's told her about them. And the drama, well, one thing I had to figure out in writing this was I didn't want a plot. I didn't want these two people to have to meet or become real to one another. But once you have two characters, you're getting close to needing a plot. So the closest thing I could think of to having a plot was that each of them worried that the other one had imagined them. The poet, the male figure, me, has a nagging anxiety that he is really just a figment of the woman's imagination. And likewise, the woman fears that she, once he stops sending these letters and poems and things in the mail, that she will disappear. So that's what they're worried about. They're worried about each other. They're worried about their own existence depending upon the other. And I'm just very grateful that you tie that to like the experience of being a reader of poetry, because, one thing that is just true, is just accurate, is that, if a poet doesn't find a reader, they cease to exist. And so much of a poet's existence in the world depends on readers who not only pick the book up instead of another book, which is weirdly chance driven and risky and scary. That might not have happened, but then they have to engage, and and with poetry, and certainly with my poetry, they have to do some portion of the imagining and the constructing of the poem. So I did feel that I wanted to represent both sides of the transaction, which is what we call poetry. Sometimes I'm the writer of the poem, but much more often I'm the reader. And I also read a fair amount of criticism, so that I feel that there's even an extra responsibility or obligation that I have as a reader, either in my written criticism or in my teaching, to kind of present and make real the poet that I'm looking at. So it's a really iffy and risky thing, to write, and to have so much of the power rest in the hands of strangers. So that was really absolutely what I was trying to represent. And I wanted to show the whole arc of a poem's genesis or evolution. I could figure out a way to show drafts of poems, and there are other poets who've done this, who've sort of included unfinished things, in their finished book or composition. I could think of ways to do that. But once you got past the 50-yard line, I had to figure out a way to represent that other really important process where the reader picks the book up and encounters it and kind of finishes it in her imagination. So that's a long-winded way of, I don't know, that's sort of what I was thinking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
That's so great. You say you spent your entire childhood reading. That's one of my favorite little gems of this. And I was the same way.
Were
I guess
you?
that's why.
But look, you're in a bookstore. You own a bookstore.
Yeah. And I guess I'm wondering if you'd characterize your adult life that way. Would you say you spent your entire adult life reading?
Yes. From the minute I wake up to the minute I go to bed, I'm reading. And I mean, much interrupted by Twitter and life and other obligations, my children, my family, stuff like that. But yeah, it's the through line is reading. And when I was a kid, I was lucky to grow up in a place in Burlington, Vermont, which is a university town. It was the 70s. There were a lot of locally owned bookstores. There were a lot of used bookstores. And I, as soon as I could be independent, we lived right in the city, so I could just walk out my front door and go onto a place called the Little Professor Bookshop, which was on Church Street, and just hang out and browse the shelves and just sit and take it all in. At one point, I had a job from the time I was 12 at a place in Winooski, Vermont called Sneakers, which is still there. I started as a dishwasher, eventually became a breakfast cook, which was great. But I had money, but I didn't have money because all I did was spend it on books, And at one point, there was some kind of very eccentric dude near Church Street in downtown Burlington who had a used and rare bookshop. And I got really into buying very, very old books. In fact, I have a couple. I just happen to have, this is not a prop, but where I'm sitting, I have a couple of them. I bought things from the 17th century. He would sell very, very, very old books that were not.
What book is that?
This is, you're going to put me on the spot. This is a little anthology of Latin and Greek poets. It has, people like Pindar, Sappho, others. It's tiny print, and I just turned 50, so I'm having trouble seeing right now. But anyway, this is actually a book, one of many that I bought at this guy's bookshop with my money from my job. So I never, long-winded way of saying, yeah, I love to read, and I love books. I really love books. The other advantage was that we lived very close to University of Vermont, and I would go to their library, the Bailey Howe Library. It was just such an unbelievable stroke of luck to have it there. And as I got interested in poetry, there was just this wealth of information available to me. It was, it wasn't like now. You couldn't just access everything instantly. There was an element of questing to it. If you wanted a book or you wanted a piece of information, you had to physically get up and walk out your door and go find it. And so there's sort of great romance to it too. I was really lucky to grow up there, I think.
So the Math Campers is dedicated to Frank Bedart and incorporates many nods to the friendship. How long have you guys been friends? How did you two meet?
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, Frank is my mentor. I think of that as a very holy term, and I would only use it of one person. And so he is my mentor. And we met in 1997 or so. I was doing my PhD at Harvard and just starting to put some thought into trying to publish these poems that I'd been writing, or just trying to get them out of the world in some way. But an academic graduate program is very stultifying, or was then very stultifying environment for a creative person. And there wasn't really an opportunity there to try out my work. So I called Frank up and asked if I could audit his classes at Wellesley College, where I now am on the faculty. And he said yes. And so I would drive out from Cambridge to Wellesley, where I'm sitting now. It's where we live now. And just sit in the back. I stood out, like a sore thumb. It's a women's college, obviously, and I was the only guy in the class, and also 5 or 6 years older than the students. So I stood out. But we, at first it was a, professional relationship. He's a great, generous, extraordinary reader. He had been Robert Lowell's most important reader. He'd been Elizabeth Bishop's most important reader. At that moment in 1997 or so, he was one of the first readers for people like Louise Glick, Robert Pinsky. Amazingly generous person with his time and attention, and incredibly incisive about work, and also brave, because I feel it in my own teaching. A student or a young person comes to you and shows you what they've done and what they've made, and it's very, very hard, if it's not working, to figure out a way to say that doesn't devastate them. So he didn't worry about that. He was very frank. Little pun there, I guess, but he was very candid. And so that was just transformative, and I think maybe his attention, his interest, his curiosity in what I was doing is one of the models for the kind of reader character that who's a woman in the book. But to have somebody who's hanging, on your every word, was great. It was really great. I hope I can do that for some folks as well. Just to,
I love that. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's great.
So,
and it's been wonderful to watch his, that was in 1997. He was already a very well-known writer, but I think his best work was still before him. So it's been amazing to watch a person's sort of career and imagination and project unfold in that way.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So shifting from people we like to people we hate.
Okay.
Not really. I learned from Twitter that you hate Robert Frost and are in fact an enemy of poetry. Would you care to comment on that?
I despise Robert Frost. It's true. It is very true. No, I think you're being sarcastic. I love Frost. I had a very gratifying experience this spring on Twitter, where I kind of rashly put out a tweet saying I think it was Frost's birthday or something, and celebrating his birthday. And I sort of rashly said, nobody likes him. And I had the most gratifying response, because it turned out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people from all different aesthetics, stripes, ages, parts of the world sort of said to me, like, what? I love Frost. And it was sort of social media at its best. People were posting lines and affirming each other's choices and sort of gently arguing and so on. It was wonderful. Yes, I love Frost. I'm actually writing a piece right now on Frost's 3rd volume of letters. I think people, when they misunderstand him, pardon me, as a kind of moralist, and as a, good fences make good neighbors and so on. And they don't maybe read those moral axioms and adages in context and see how often he's troubling, contextualizing, unsteadying them. One thing about the letters that is just on my mind, because I'm writing about them, you see just the devastation in his life, just unimaginable tragedies. He lost a son at the age of 4. He lost a baby. He and his wife, Eleanor, lost a baby just a few days old. And then their adult daughter died in childbirth. And then their beloved son, Carol, killed himself with his shotgun. So 4 out of their 6 children died. And the other 2, I think, really kept their distance after that. And then his wife died. So the Frost that we picture, that sort of sage elder, going barnstorming the world, the country, going from campus to campus. And he was a lonely, very lonely person. So there's a whole person in those poems that I love very much. And there's also just the New England, the sound, the sound of New England thought, New England speech, the succinctness of it, the almost mysterious quality of not saying quite enough sometimes. And that is a tone that I just caught really early and have always held onto. The other thing is, I went to Amherst College. I'm representing here Middlebury College, Vermont, because we're sort of roughly in that neck of the woods. But I went to Amherst College, a rival school, and Frost was very, very vividly remembered there. In fact, my teachers had been his students. The training there, which has changed now and needed to change because it was very white and extremely homogenous in terms of the authors that were taught. But a good thing about it was that it taught a very rigorous way of reading and listening to poetry, which was handed down from Frost to those professors to their students. And it's still the first thing I do when I read a poem is sort of, just put my ear next to it, just to sort of get a sense of really what's going on before I leap to any conclusions about what it's saying.
Have you memorized any of Frost's poems?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could you give us an impromptu recital?
Oh man, Rena. Okay. Can I do this? Let's see. What's it called? It's called Tree. Is it called Tree at My Window? It's kind of an unknown, not very well known one. Tree at my window. Oh, look, here's a tree. Here's a sort of a tree. Tree at my window, window tree. My sash is lowered when night comes on, but let there never be curtain drawn between you and me. Vague dream head lifted out of the clouds, or thing next most diffuse to sound, not all your light tongues talking aloud could be profound. Yet, tree, I have seen you taken and tossed, and if you have seen me when I slept, you've seen me taken and tossed and all but lost. That day she put our heads together, fate had her imagination about her, your head so much concerned with outer, mine with inner weather. Thanks. You have to swear that you did not tell me you were gonna ask that. Do you swear? Okay.
Swear.
Right, because otherwise people will think I studied up. No, thank you. That was great. I screwed something up in the second to last stanza. I could hear in the meter that it was wrong, but that's
No,
one.
that was beautiful. That
Oh,
was so beautiful.
thanks. I love that one. Yeah.
So I was wondering a little bit about UFOs, and because, yeah, and well, really my question is, my real true question here is, if you could be sent into space for like a poet in space residency program, would you go? But also, how do UFOs and recent evidence of UFO sightings complicate that that fantasy of a, poet in space?
Well, that's really interesting. I've almost never done a residency of any kind. I am just not I'm a gregarious guy, but I don't know. My life circumstances or my inclinations or something. So I don't think I would do one in space. I mean, I've never even done Yaddo, or Breadloaf for that matter. So, but I don't think I would want a residency in space. I mean, it would depend, the devil's in the details. Can we agree? I mean, if it was like a really amazing spaceship, kind of done up to look like Vermont, maybe sort of like with some trees and I don't know, but I don't think so. But the UFO stuff is just very preoccupying to me right now. I'm sure people have heard, sort of the rudiments, but the government seems interested in trying to figure out what's going on. And these are not quacks or wackos. These are scientists and Navy fighter pilots and military people and Pentagon people. And, they're saying that there is technology that they have seen and they have registered on their instruments that can't be explained by physics, by our science. And it's just very consuming. There was an excellent long narrative piece in the New Yorker by Gideon Lewis Krauss a few weeks ago, which I'd recommend. But it's almost as though our technology has caught up to a phenomenon that has been reported for decades and centuries. And what you see is the kind of anecdotal witness reports that were always dismissed as crazy and lunatic and so on. Those line right up with what we now can see on radar and on instruments. And so I kind of, in the back of my mind, am thinking of writing something about this because I'm very moved, actually, that there's a whole community of people, many of them now dead, who kept the secret because it was there was such the fear of being considered a lunatic. And now that there's some level of scientific confirmation, I think more people will come out and talk about what they've seen. And and just sort of in a meta way, I am very interested in what would count as credible, testimony to something that is so much doubted and so seems to be irrational. And I'm interested in when people put themselves and their reputations on the line, to say, yes, I saw this. I've never seen one. I've looked. Almost every night I look if it's a clear night. But have you ever seen anything? No.
No, but people don't want to embrace like things that are awe-inspiring. Like it seems natural to me that a poet would be like, hey,
I know.
Imagine this. Like,
yeah, I totally agree. I must say that it's a little inconvenient to be a poet if what you're really trying to do is convince people that this exists.
Well, I don't know.
But, no, I don't know. Yeah, it is awe-inspiring, and it's I don't know. I just encourage everybody to look at the videos and look at the photographs. And there's a wonderful. Now I'm just pitching, but there's a wonderful book by Leslie Kean, Kean, a very credible scientist and researcher that has all kinds of great material in it. So we shall see. We shall see. Wouldn't it be something?
I want them to be talking to whales. Like for some reason, whales need to be part of this for me. Like the awe and wonder I feel on a whale watch off Cape Cod is like unparalleled. I don't think I could see anything that would make me feel more like just struck with when I see whales, I cry. And I think that people who see or encounter extraterrestrials or whatever probably have a really similar experience to that, where you're just like,
right.
What is this? Like, I mean, you've seen a whale, right?
I have. Yeah, no, it's astonishing. Yeah, I'll just mention another book. It's by a grad school professor of mine, Philip Fisher. It's called Wonder, the Rainbow, and the Aesthetics of Rare Experiences. And it's very much about how a person conceives of an aesthetic response to something that's a surprise, or that's so unusual, like a rainbow, or like a whale, or like a UFO. So yeah, that would be great. One thing about them, I don't know if you've seen, but on a couple of the videos that are out there, you can see these things appearing to disappear into the ocean.
Right. And then
And
reappear without any harm, right?
exactly.
Because they're
And
with the whales.
there you go.
I would
There you
love for
go.
that to be the case. I just would.
Wouldn't it be great? I know I hadn't thought about the whale connection, but let's keep an eye on that.
Well, I really don't want whales to go extinct. So if aliens
Right.
could figure that out.
And now you're a huge Moby Dick person.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, famous. So
Obsessed. I mean, Herman Melville definitely would have believed in UFOs. Like there's no question that he would
absolutely.
have been sitting on the sidelines, not
Mhm.
participating in this discussion in this moment, right? And like, I don't know. I mean, I think we have to embrace it. And I think anything that makes you feel
Yeah.
just that wonder and that awe, like why should we turn away from it or be skeptical about it or try to put it in its place? Or
Right.
I mean, that's not what poets do, right? Like,
No.
so you have the perfect job.
Exactly. Apparently so. Yeah.
So I have a question about James Merrill's house.
Oh. Mhm.
The math campers goes a long way towards answering the question, but it leaves me wondering if there's anything about the experience of living there that really stuck with you that you couldn't write about. Like, did you take any ideas with you that you might
Mhm.
write about in the future or writing about now, or just,
Sure.
just things that maybe haunt you from the time you spent there?
Yeah, haunt is the right word, I think. So just so folks know, there's the great American poet James Merrill, who died in 95 or 96, left his extremely eccentric property. It's an apartment on the top 2 floors of a commercial block in a beautiful coastal town called Stonington. And he left it more or less the way he lived in it, full of his possessions, stacks of magazines and newspapers that were still there in 2017. I imagine they're still there. Amazing collection of books that are all his. And they have a residency for writers. So I would encourage anybody with a project to work on to apply. Let's see. I was going to say it's an enchanted space, but that's a little weak. It's kind of a ghosted space, because he was a great aesthete, and all of the objects, all of the decor, they were all chosen by Merrill. And many of them were described in poems or in prose by Merrill. And so when you're in that space, you very much feel Merrill's presence. We're definitely delving into the supernatural here, because one unique thing about that apartment is that it's the place where Merrill and his husband, really, David Jackson, would conduct their seances, their Ouija sessions. And as a result of those sessions, night after night after night after night for decades, I think, to me, one of the greatest American long poems, The Changing Light at Sandover. So it's a space that has been inhabited by spirits for decades. And I believe that you can feel Merrill's presence there as well now. So I some of that's in my book, but there's a lot more to be said, for sure. I'd love to write about it, or just, I taught a course on Merrill this past spring, just now, really. And I think it went well. And I had a lot to say just about what it's like to be there. It's cool. They do give tours occasionally, so you could follow them on Instagram and find out when those would be.
Nice. And
Yeah.
what ideas are you working through for your next book? Or is it too early to talk about it?
No, I haven't written any poetry since the Math Campers, but that's okay. That's the way I work. It's no big deal. But I do have a bunch of ideas for nonfiction projects, and I wouldn't be surprised if those got spun off into poems. One thing I really want to do is write something about the radical puppet theater group Bread and Puppet up in Glover, Vermont. You know it?
Yes,
Yeah.
I love it.
No. Well, I love it too. And, we were just there visiting their museum I guess it was last weekend. And I've written to them to ask if maybe they would allow me to come up there and spend some time with them and just look at their process, getting ready for the weekend performances or constructing, constructing masks or puppets, baking the bread. So I'm hoping they'll allow it. I really want to do it. And I want to write about the place and the processes that you can behold there. I'm also really interested in how an institution like Bread and Puppet sort of remembers itself. There's a museum, but the museum is extremely unique in that they say they think of the objects in the museum as actually deteriorating. They're not intending to preserve them, and there's no archive or historian on site there. And a lot of the press that Bread and Puppet has gotten over the years is in indie magazine, indie newspapers, alternative newspapers, things that are not online, and scattered then everywhere, in people's archives or in libraries. So anyway, I want to write about them because I love the work and can't get it out of my mind. And also just about how institutions like that think about themselves.
That's fascinating. Well, I can't wait to read that.
Okay, I hope it works out.
I love how ugly their puppets are.
Oh, it's terrifying. When I was a kid, they would turn up, all the time in Burlington, and I was very frightened. But that's really interesting in a way.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Mm.
Well, that's so exciting, and I can't wait to read that. And I hope to have you come and read at the store in the fall. And
Great, I love it. Thank you, Rena.